The first time I interviewed you was 20 years ago.
My gosh.
I know. And I remember very clearly we talked about labels and you warned against composers wearing labels. You said it's important not to put a box around your imagination.
Yeah, I wish I could change my wording, but I think I hit it right the first time.
I mean, your music obviously has a style, and it's hard to imagine it changing now. Or do you think that it does? I mean, do you hear changes in your musical style?
Well, I think if I played for some unknown listener, let's say piano phase, and then played them Tehillim, and they might say, well, who are those two composers? And I like that. And yes, it's it's if you know a little bit more about music, you probably could make an educated guess that it was the same composer, but it's not abundantly obvious. So I have changed gradually over the years, and the changes can be pretty much delineated. The rate of change is much faster in my music than it was in drumming, which took an hour with one pattern. And the orchestration has grown considerably more complicated than it was, more fleshed out. And the melodic content has become more recognizably melodic content.
When we talked more recently on this program about Three Tales, I asked you if you considered yourself a religious composer, and you said no. Still no?
I'm a religious man, but I don't write. You see, Arvo Pärt, who I admire enormously, and I think you're maybe fortunate enough to have come to do the same thing I'm doing this year in the future, is a member, well, it was originally a member of the Orthodox Eastern Church, and I think writes sometimes as well for the Roman Church, can write in an institution, namely the church, that has a tradition of writing new masses, new pieces of music that will be used in the church as part of the liturgy. Arvo Pärt, is a religious composer. Let's talk about something outside of me. Stravinsky. Is Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms a religious piece? No, it's not at all. It's a concert piece. There's no place in the church. You can play it in a church. You can play any music in a church.
But it's dedicated to the glory of God.
So what? So mine. That and $2 will get you on the New York subway system. What makes Stravinsky's music religious is his Mass. His Mass is a piece of religious music because it's part of the liturgy of the Catholic Church. Being a Jew, writing music which uses in Tehillim psalm text in Hebrew, there's no place in Jewish liturgy for that kind of music. We don't. The idea of traditional Jewish music is a single male voice chanting from the scroll, from the Torah, and from the prophets, and that's it. And as a good Jew and as a good musicologist, I support that. So there's no place. So what I'm doing is concert music on religious texts, which I really mean as a human being in terms of the authenticity of what it is that I'm saying. But I think I'm honest enough to know that I'm addressing an audience of who knows who in a concert setting, and that the piece has to work that way because that's going to be its life.
Mentioning Symphony of Psalms,
which is usually played in the concert hall 99 times out of 100.
Of course. Yes, it's a concert piece for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, isn't it? But at the end of that piece, which is one of the great moments of Stravinsky.
Gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It makes me wonder about the end of WTC 9/11, which, in a very different way, has a similar sort of effect on me anyway as a listener. There's something is transcendent there. Could you talk about the end of that piece?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm very happy. I mean, it's my most recently completed piece, and not a lot of people have heard it, so I'm glad you have. WTC 9/11, for those who don't know, is about 9/11. And the first two movements involve the voices of first the traffic controllers and then the New York City Fire Department, experiencing what went on that day from the field recordings that I had access to. Second movement is interviews with my friends and neighbors. I lived for 25 years, 4 blocks from Ground Zero, speaking to them about what they remembered, on that day. And everybody, remembers what they did that day. The last movement came. I was actually reading the paper a couple of weeks after 9/11, and I saw there was an article that said that I did not know this law within Judaism, but there's a law in Judaism which says that from the time of death until the time of burial, you don't leave a body unattended. You don't leave it alone. And there were people coming down from a synagogue on the Upper West Side, which is a pretty long trip. Such few bodies as there were, and a number of body parts, were kept at the medical examiner's office in the East 30s on the east side of Manhattan. So these members of the synagogue were coming down, 60, 70 blocks to sit and say psalms or chant psalms next to these bodies. But on the Sabbath, you can't carry money, you can't travel in a public conveyance. It was impossible for them to come. So they started looking around who's living in the East 30s who can walk over there. And they found these women going to Stern College, which is part of Yeshiva University, who heard about it and said, we're in, count us in. And the New York Times picked this up, that these women would go over, they'd walk over, they'd sit in tents next to refrigerated trucks for who knows who was there. And they were on shifts, so many hours, and somebody else came in, singing, chanting, saying psalms, parts of the Bible, which is traditionally what's done. And I thought to myself, what a beautiful thing.
It's a kind of gift, isn't it? Yeah.
What an incredible thing. So when the idea of 9/11 came to me, I thought, well, I'm going to deal with what went on, and then in the third movement, I'm going to shift to this event, and I have to locate these people. And I located two of them, and one of them turned out to be the former president of Boozy and Hawks in New York, who has left Boozy and Hawks and become a lay chaplain at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and took on this obligation herself and moved down to that area temporarily so she could do it. So I then went to one of the two voices you hear these two women speaking, but when it comes to the singing that you're referring to, it's the first voice is the voice of Maya Beiser, who is the Israeli cellist, who I know very well. I wrote the cello piece for her, and she had lost her mother a few months ago, and I knew that she'd gone back to Israel and that she had been at the funeral, and she told me that she played the cello over her mother's body, and then she sang psalms as everybody else does. I said, look, Maya, I'm doing this piece, this is what it's about. I said, would you be willing to, and I mentioned the 121st Psalm, would you sing that last line for me? She said, I'd love to, So I went up there and I just recorded her, and then I went to one of the best-known and highly respected canors in New York and asked him to do part of what's called the Wayfarer's Prayer. When you get on an airplane, you're supposed to say it, so that you get there. It's actually from Exodus, and the Hebrew is Hine Anoki Shaleach Malach Lefanecha Leshamarcha Bederech Behilavaha El Hamakom Asher Hakinoti, which means, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. And I hope somebody says that when I'm in that position. So when you hear them, as you may have noticed on the recording, their voices are very mixed back behind the strings. So you have to kind of lean forward to hear what they're singing, which is exactly what I wanted. When the cantor started singing, he was singing full voice. I said, no, you're right next to the mace. The mace means you're right next to the body. Oh, and then immediately. So that's what it's about. But what you're leaving out is that at the very end of the beginning of WTC 9/11 began. One day I was going into the shower, and I, as a 75-year-old, still have a landline, thank you, and I'd left my phone off the hook. So as I'm going into the bathroom, I hear beep, 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 beep. Shut up. And I think, eureka, that's how this piece begins. So I don't have perfect pitch. I went back to the phone and said, oh, it's an F. So we start in F minor, and the first note is David Harrington, first violin, doubling the telephone. And then John Sherwood comes in with an E natural to make this, very distant. Okay, so after this section that you're referring to, which David Lang, the composer and my good friend who I've referred to quite a bit since I've been here, first he says, when Maya's singing, the world to come, I don't really know what that means, which is, who does? And then he paused and he said, and then there's the world right here. And that's the last line in the piece. And then it goes right back to the telephone. Because, in fact, unfortunately, 9/11 is not some little event that happened on the moon. And I mean, there are literally, unfortunately, probably close to over 100 events that have followed since that time. And I'm afraid that there may be still more. So that's how the piece goes back. But yes, that's the part of the piece that examines, I believe, that there is a world to come. And I have no more idea about it than David Lang does, but I hope we get there.
Well, thanks for pausing on your way to talk to me. Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
much, Steve Reich, for
Thank
being
you.
my guest on today's music show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And there's the world. And there's the world right here.
And that's the end of WTC 9/11 by Steve Reich from the recording by the Kronos Quartet.